This crowd rises to its feet. Vaccaro slammed it home. Garland left wing, free ball. Perfect! Garland went to the lane, lobbed to Mobley. Pow! And Allen blocked the shot at the rim. Pow! With the left hand and a foul.
Welcome to the Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs media family. I'm your host, Justin Rowan. The Chase Down is presented by Fubo, the official streaming partner of the Cavs. Watch over 350 channels of live sports and TV, including FanDuel Sports Network without cable. There's no cost and no commitment. Try for free at FuboTV.com/Cavs. We are doing a Thanksgiving mailbag episode today. No game since we last recorded, but some really important games coming up for the Cavs. They have an NBA Cup game against the Atlanta Hawks on Friday, and then, of course, a rematch against the Boston Celtics, back with Kristaps Porzingis. Joining me today is my co-host, Carter Rodriguez. Carter, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, but it's immensely weird to have 2 days between podcasts and not have a game to talk about, given the pace of the season. I'm eager for Thanksgiving. Daughter's got a little pneumonia, so, that's not so fun. But she's been a trooper and has been in stunningly good spirits despite it, and just mostly is laying around like a zombie. So, but we're on the come up. And
man, it's almost
life.
The holidays. It's almost the holidays. You'll be laying around looking like a zombie in no time as well. You'll get to enjoy some time off. I'm sure your Dallas Cowboys will probably look like that in the Thanksgiving game as well. they'll probably be laying around like zombies as well.
Unlike this, I have no professional obligation to the Dallas Cowboys, and thus they are not getting my time for the rest of the year.
That is fair. That sounds healthy for you. I want to kick this Thanksgiving mailbag off by thanking all of our listeners. We wouldn't be able to do these mailbag episodes with you, and honestly, we wouldn't be able to do this podcast without you guys. You guys are the absolute best. We really do appreciate all the ways that you guys support us. Just as a reminder, we got these questions coming in from Twitter, from Blue Sky, from our Discord. If you want to be part of our Discord, just send a screenshot of a review or a rating, whatever podcast server you use, send that to chasedownpod@gmail.com and continue to, be part of our community that way. But let's kick things off with some Thanksgiving questions. Our buddy Drucifer asks, out of all the Thanksgiving food, what is the best to throw at an unruly family member? Please leave drinks out of it. Because the obvious answer there would be a bottle of wine.
Well, I'll tell you what. If this wouldn't be a Cavaliers podcast if we didn't talk about a bowl of soup to throw at a family member. So yeah, I'll go with soup though. You got to be careful because like depending on the level of scalding. You could be looking at prison time if you're not careful.
This is true. And, I think with that decision, you're also factoring in how much you care for the person whose house that is, because there's quite a bit of cleanup there.
Sure. I think if I'm hurling food, I'm all id in that moment. I'm not quite thinking about the ramifications.
Look at you. You got to control your temper. Out of the two of us, that's what people always say about you rather than me. I'm going to go with stuffing because stuffing, I feel like you can get a good amount of velocity on that, and then it makes the impact once it hits you.
Yeah, you could. I think it would really explode on the face too.
Right. So you want it to be solid enough to get kind of that trajectory through the air, but then you want the impact too. And I think the cleanup would be reasonable enough that I'm not factoring that into, my decision-making process. So I think I'm going to go with stuffing. Our boy, Matt Gold asks, does mac and cheese belong at Thanksgiving? Now, mac and cheese doesn't really show up for Canadian Thanksgivings. We had ours obviously a month and a half ago. So I'm going to let you lead on this one.
You know what? First off, shout out to the golden boy, of the man who actually keeps this podcast running. Mac and cheese absolutely belongs at Thanksgiving. It's not a discussion. It's a savory food that is full of starch, and depending on what kind of cheese you're using, matches blends very well into the sea of beige that is my Thanksgiving plate. So yeah, it's absolutely a Thanksgiving food. And I don't understand who out here is gatekeeping because it's so complementary with all the other foods.
Yeah, like I get the argument that maybe it's a main, like you don't really want it as a side, but for me, like a nice homemade mac and cheese. Obviously, I can't really eat it, or I shouldn't say obviously, but I can't eat gluten, so I'm kind of SOL when it comes to mac and cheese. But I would absolutely be eating it if I could. Getting to the Cavs questions now, because we don't want to be too self-indulgent with these non-basketball questions. Our buddy Drew asks from the Discord, accepting that this premise is a bit questionable, would you rather see the Cavs dedicate their energy to winning the NBA Cup or getting the 1 seed?
Oh, well, I will say that is a questionable premise, Drew. God bless you. A Discord star.
That is his signature, to be fair.
Yes. I think that, ultimately, I would rather them get the 1 seed. I think the 1 seed is important because I think Boston will be the 2 seed. And in the end, having home court all the way through is important. Luckily, I don't think those two goals conflict with each other one iota because you win all your games, you will win the NBA Cup, and you will get the 1 seed. So, I think ultimately it's not that complicated, and actually kind of ties into Max Seiko's question in the live chat, which is, would you rather get the 1 seed and be in a tougher side of the bracket, or a 2 or a 3 seed and be on the easier side of the bracket? Same answer. 1 seed all the way, baby.
Yeah, as much as I'm very invested in the NBA Cup and I want the Cavs to win it, ultimately we are going to be judged by how we do against the Boston Celtics. And, while Boston's going to be favored in that series, Cleveland has an amazing home court. I think as many games as you can have in that building is going to be an advantage. And, if things break the right way and you outplay them in that series, because, sometimes it just comes down to who's better 4 out of 7 times. If you're the 1 seed in the East, you might be the 1 seed overall. And that might mean that you have, home court in the NBA Finals as well. And, I came into this season doing our preview podcast where I said, this is the first year where it feels like, the Cavs have a legitimate shot to win a title, whether that's, just a 5% chance and they need breaks. I feel like that percentage is moving up a little bit.
It's got to
obviously you have to get through what I would argue is the best team in the NBA to do so. But the Cavs are legitimate contenders. And, I think last year I may have argued that I preferred the NBA Cup because I didn't feel like, even if we were the 1 seed, I didn't think that there was enough playoff experience here with this group, and Mobley hadn't made the leap yet and things like that. I think I would have taken the NBA Cup and been like, you know what, we can give Boston a tough series even if we don't have home court. But with kind of the shifting expectations of this season, I'm going to go with the 1 seed.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like, it's just, again, and they're just not mutually exclusive in the end.
They're not. Yeah.
You can have both.
It's the opposite. Winning the NBA Cup and winning those, group play games is going to help you get the 1 seed. So, more winning, the better. I think at this point, we're getting spoiled when it comes to the winning, but I just want to keep it going. Carter, you have a question from the chat.
Justin Carter, what do you think a Ty Jerome contract looks if he keeps playing at this rate? More than it was, we're not exactly like, we're certainly no CBA experts, and there's a ton of weird rules about when you're over the tax, and the Cavs are projected to be over the tax next year. What does that look like? Bird rights are weird when you're signed to a biannual exception like they did. But that said, like, I do expect him to get a real deal. If he keeps this up. There is generally kind of a truism in the league that once you're a minimum contract player, you're always a minimum contract player. I think there's exceptions, and I feel like Ty is playing himself into being an exception.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I think we're still getting used to what contracts look like in this current NBA. This last free agency was a bit of a dud. I don't think a single player got a mid-level exception, not the full one. So I guess the best way to answer this is what the options are, basically, because when you have early bird rights with a player, you can sign them for either 175% of their current contract, which wouldn't be a lot, where Ty's currently at. The other option, so it's kind of a whichever is greater, you are able to sign that player for 105% of basically what the average NBA salary is. Our buddy Bob Schmidt at the Fear the Furrow podcast did some research on that. I talked to cap people, and they've kind of confirmed it. So in Ty's instance, the greater amount would be that. And I believe they said 105% of the average NBA salary would be around like $13 million. I think it certainly gives them options. Who knows? I mean, if he keeps playing like this, we got to talk about Ty for all NBA. We like, if there's zero regression, we're going to be winning it.
I went ahead and looked up. He's 20th in the NBA in win shares right now. That's a counting stat. That's not even a per minute stat.
That's absurd. Like, he's been so damn good, but I think the Cavs are going to have options available to them, and I think that's the most important thing. And we'll see what happens. I think even looking back to contracts like Bruce Brown going to Indiana, I don't know if that happens in this new CBA landscape. So I think we're all getting used to it, but the most important thing is that there is going to be options available to the Cavs to retain him, even though he is on a bargain deal this year. Next question coming in from Alex from our Discord. Cavs defense seems to have dipped a bunch over the past 10 games. I wonder what you make of it. I have some possible theories. Is the increased offensive pace causing more turnovers? Is it because of the deeper rotation, more minutes to relatively worse defensive players? We seem to be running more zone among the most in the league. Is that making things better or worse? Or is it nothing and just kind of a fluke small sample size and schedule? Carter, your thoughts?
So I did a little digging, and I know you did some digging too, because I've been wondering about this, because the Cavs have kind of been hovering around 8 to 10 in defensive rating this year. It's one of the only things that you can demonstratively point at and be like, that's worse. Mm-hmm. And it's been confusing to me, because my eye test has generally felt like they've been as good as they've ever been. That's what eye test told me. So I did some digging. I pulled it up on Cleaning the Glass, and they are 11th in the league in opponent 3-point frequency. So I'm like, okay, that's a good stat. That means only 10 other teams are allowing 3-point attempts.
Yeah,
a little bit better than league average. Not amazing, but not bad either. Like, you're a few percentile points above the 50th percentile. However, they're 28th in opponent 3-point accuracy. So I go, my first instinct is like, bad luck, baby. Defensive rating is on the climb. We got it. And, I do think there's some of that. However, then I went to NBA.com and I checked out the tracking data that shows how well contested you are. Because I'm like, well, I was thinking, well, maybe they're keeping the attempts down, but the attempts they're giving up are really good. And that is the case. Right now, they're 17th in wide open 3-point attempt frequency for opponents. And in the last 10 games, they're 22nd. So they are giving up a high percentage of opponent threes as being wide open, relative to their league peers. And the reality is, if the world was perfectly fair, they would be 17th in wide open 3-point frequency and 17th in opposing 3-point percentage. So there's probably some normalization, but I do think if I'm Kenny Atkinson and his staff, I'm looking at that number and going, we need to be above league average. We know we're going to protect the rim really well, but that should come out of the box. We should be able to do that even if we don't build our whole defense around protecting the rim because we have Evan and Jarrett. So I think that is a reason why I think you can point to the fact that the Cavs have been cooked from three a little bit at points this season. Your thoughts?
I think it's something. We've had the 3-point regression and progression conversations. It seems like every year, and the last 2 years it normalized, right? Like last year, we gave up the 7th fewest wide open threes per game. The year prior, we gave up the fewest. This year, as you said, it's different, right? Like we are giving up quite a bit more. I do find it interesting though. Like you look at the 44% that teams are shooting on those wide open shots, that number is going to come down. But you know what else is going to come down? We are shooting 49% ourselves on those wide open shots, and the frequency is about the same. So I think it's going to even out where the offense isn't as good as it's currently been, and there's going to be some regression there. And I think the defense is a little better than it's been as well, and you're going to see some regression there. As an example, looking at the 44% that teams are shooting against the Cavs on those wide open shots, Boston for the year shoots 40% on those wide open looks, right? Like, I don't think and
against the Cavs, they shot 100%.
I've said this before, but there is no type of defense you can play that's going to make someone shoot better than when they're wide open. I'm sorry, it's just not how it works. You look at someone like Darius, and I think why some of his catch-all numbers defensively aren't as good, even though the eye test tells you he's been playing better defense, is the guy he's guarding is shooting 49% from three. Like he's defending 5 threes a game. Like that's absolutely absurd. But
do you think the only reason I bring this up, Ringer Racing in the chat just said, because of our small backcourt, teams shoot over us with confidence. Do you think there's some degree of that where Darius is technically contesting the shot, but because he's switched on to 6'7", 6'8", think about the Jason Tatum possessions, that his contest might mean less than a 7-footer's contest?
They do. Yeah, I think it absolutely does. I do think, the notion of being shot over is a little overstated. But yeah, it means less, but you're still not going to shoot better than what your averages are when you're left wide open, right? Yes. So I was actually saving this for a later question, but because we were talking about Tatum being switched on to Darius, that was a major talking point coming out of that game of, the Boston was hunting Darius at will, right? Like, they're getting him involved in screen actions. They're getting that switch and they're attacking him. When you look at how he actually performed in those possessions, he allowed 0.7 points per possession on those possessions. Handy stat brought up by the Dunker Spot guys when he was defending those kind of pick and roll ball handling possessions. And if you're like me, you hear that stat and you don't know what it means, right? 0.7. How can I kind of contextualize this? Do you know what points per possession Isaac Okoro shot on spot up shots in last year's playoff?
Tell me.
0.7 exactly. So all those possessions of Jason Tatum, isolating,
picking
on Darius, the results were effectively the same as Isaac Okoro spot ups in last year's playoff. Right, was something that teams were willingly giving up. So I think that goes to what we've talked about in the past, where Boston kind of breaks their offense sometimes to pick on those individual matchups. And I think, when you're trying to cut into a lead and take a lead yourself, when you see a player rise up over a smaller defender and hit some of those shots, it feels worse than it actually is. Think back to the Knicks series as an example of that. So I think there's something to it, but I do think you have to look at the overall results, which is the small backcourt, regular season and playoffs, has been elite. Like, it was elite against the Celtics. It's been elite against the Knicks. It was elite against Orlando. It's been elite every single year that they've been together on the defensive end. And to me, that's the most important thing. But getting back to Alex's question, I do think, playing zone has an impact on that. You're going to give up more open threes as a result of that. And I think that's one of the things that I'd really like to learn is how much are we going to play zone when we are fully healthy? How much of that is a product of we're playing extended minutes of Sam Merrill and George Niang together, where maybe that's going to be Dean Wade and Max Strus or Karis LeVert or Isaac Okoro. When we have these better individual defenders that all rated out as very good defenders, are we going to play as much zone as we have during the stretch? That remains to be seen. And I also think it's worth noting that, like, those guys are going to suppress three-point attempts, right? Like, Isaac Okoro does a really good job in those possessions. And, you played Boston without those guys. Like, I think all of that has an impact. So I do think it's something, but I still think, I would file that into the category of a data point we're keeping an eye on. It's something that the team has talked about, that they feel like there's been defensive slippage and they want to improve there. So I would keep an eye on it, but it's not like past years when we've had these conversations where we sat here and we said, they're really not giving up a lot of these attempts. It's going to normalize, and the numbers did. Yeah,
I think there's more smoke than in years past, which is funny because in years past the team was worse. Yeah. So and not saying they were bad, but they were worse. And so I think people are a lot more willing to overlook that smoke right now in a way they weren't willing to overlook it when the offense wasn't scoring at literal best in league history levels. So it's something to really.
We're picking nits. It's still a top 10 defense that we're talking about here.
Yep, but like I do still think and here's another little thing, and it's not enough of a sample size to matter in a meaningful way for the defensive rating. So whatever, there have been more games where Jared Allen has not closed in crunch time, and it does feel like when Kenny has chosen between offense or defense with his lineup configuration in the tight games, there's been more times than JB ever did that he has chosen offense. So not something that meaningfully affects the D rating, but maybe affects the way we feel about late game.
Was it just the Boston game?
No, it's two.
I feel like it was just the Boston game.
2 or 3 he's done.
Okay.
The Nightmare Jarrett game, I forget which one it was. But he didn't close in that one either. So just right. It's not even a data point. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to bring it up because it's so small. But it's just a thought that, like, maybe. No,
I think that's what we do in this podcast, right? Like we think out loud, and I think outlining our thought process and what variables we're considering is really important for our audience, right? Because we like to be transparent about where we're wrong, and when you show your work, they can at least see, and we can see and have discussions about, okay, what were we overvaluing? What weren't we valuing enough, right? Like, I think all of that is really, really important, and that's a smart point to bring up.
Yeah, I'm full of them.
You're full of a lot of things. Next question, Carter.
Oh, I'm reading. I'll go back to the YouTube chat. Rorschach asks, how do you see the rotation changing when everyone gets healthy?
I think we're still going to go deep most nights. That would be my expectation. I think the two guys that would be most kind of on the fringe would be Sam and George. I think fully healthy Dean Wade is going to make it hard to keep him off the court. I think even though when he was starting, he wasn't playing starters minutes, I think you want to keep him around that same minute load. Like, I think you want to be getting him 20 minutes per game, and a lot of that's going to come at power forward. And I just feel like when it comes to Sam Merrill, what he brings as a movement shooter is very valuable. But even though Strus isn't as good of a shooter as him, he brings so much else to the table and has more length and has more defensive chops. I just kind of feel like those guys might be the ones that suffer, but I still think it's going to be a 9-10 man rotation. And when the Cavs are playing as well as they've been playing, there's going to be a lot of garbage time. There's going to be opportunities, and you're going to have nights where guys aren't performing, and that's going to open the door for other guys to step up.
So something I've noticed about Kenny, especially as the team's health has pared down a little bit, and he really only has, 7 or 8 of his like opening night rotation available to him, is that he'll still play 9 or 10 guys, but those guys have to play well in their shift to get to play again. Like last, on the last game, Craig and Jalen got a run. They played about 6-7 minutes. Didn't go very well, and we did not see them again. So to that end, what I think is going to happen is I think Kenny is going to play 11 guys in the first half of regular season games. And I think he will play 8 or 9 in the second half of those games. So you will have more guys playing an individual 7 or 8 minute shift and maybe not getting back in. And he's going to read the room on who's playing well, whose shift looked good in that first half. That is my guess as of now, which is just that, Sam and George and Dean and Ice are all going to get a shot. And he's just kind of read like, oh, this is an Isaac game. We need more Isaac. And then the other guys will kind of fall off. That's my first guess. What do you think about that theory?
I'm going to disagree. I think we see the same number of guys getting in the first half. It's just rather than, hey, they didn't have it the first shift, we're going to tighten up the rotation in the second half. It might be that's where 10 and 11 get in, right? Like that's where, all right, like, Isaac didn't have it tonight. We're going to give Sam some run in the second half, right? Like we're looking to get a spark here, or maybe Georgia is bringing that. I think that might be the way that this goes, rather than expanding the first half rotation. And maybe sometimes it still tightens up in the second half. Maybe you are playing a Boston or another one of these top teams, and you run the shorter rotation. But I think 11 guys in a 24-minute span is just really, really tough to do. I mean, in any viable
Steve Kerr
way.
is doing it every night, for what it's worth. And like they're running an 11-man rotation. Steph still gets his 30-ish minutes. Wiggins typically gets his 30. Draymond gets his 30. And it's just you have right now, when he's running a functional 8 to 9-man rotation that can expand to 10 if you play well in your first half shift. Like you're seeing a lot of the whatever role player has it that night will get all the way up to 28, 29. You don't really you're not going to see that if he was running 11. But again, Kenny is a Steve Kerr disciple. He's been coaching with this guy for 3-4 years. Clearly they got along pretty darn well because he's brought these deep rotations with him. And I also think no one's playing badly enough. To warrant losing the minutes. So I just have a feeling he's going to start with 11. There's no shot he does 11 in the postseason, but
of course,
mid-February, everyone's tired. Yeah, I'll bet he plays 11. I just have a feeling.
I just feel like there's a difference between a disciple and a clone, and
sure.
11 is just so many guys to keep track of, and you're not sitting there with a bunch of tools at your disposal to help keep track of things like Zoom AI Companion, because only you can do your best work, Carter, but Zoom AI Companion can help you do the rest, like automatically taking notes, answering meeting questions, and helping you respond to your coworker. Available at no additional cost with eligible paid plans. We're happy with Zoom AI Companion.
Yeah, I mean, talk about a great use of AI. Probably is just like a little buzzer that's like, "Hey,
rotation management,
make your subs." I would forget all the time. I'd be the worst coach for that.
100%. Pastor A-Rod in our Discord asks, "I love that the Cavs are not being complacent about this winning streak. What's one thing you'd like to see each of the starters get better at this season?"
Great question. Great question, A-Rod. I think I'm just going to go in order. Darius, I would like to continue to see him figure out how not to over-penetrate on his drives. I find that sometimes he will attack and he doesn't have the floater range, and he just tries to like barrel into guys' chests, and he hasn't been crafty enough at drawing fouls, and he just gets the ball spiked on him when he over penetrates. So that's Darius. I'm gonna go fast. Donovan, I think it's just gonna continue to be don't predetermine what you're gonna do on offense as much as you can. And a thing I've noticed in the last game that I really liked, and I'm really enjoying more and more, keep setting them screens, baby. I feel like Donovan has never set this many screens in his career. I was actually going to bug the Dunker Spot boys for some synergy stats earlier today and then got busy. But I really want to see, like, how many screens has Donovan set this year versus last year? So I'll bet he's all getting close to last year's number already. Just doing a lot of dirty work, not just on the Evan Mobley inverted pick and roll, but he's screening for Ty Jerome to get him loose. I've really enjoyed seeing that part of his game, because then when he slips, it's really, really hard for teams to deal with that. So I'd like to see more of that from him. I'm going to go Isaac Okoro as the third starter. I don't know, man.
You should have done Max and just be healthy as your answer.
Max should get a better ankle. No, Isaac, I don't know if I really have anything super specific for him. You know, I just
Rebound.
think rebound. Don't have invisible box scores, but that's kind of the perpetual. Evan, I will note, I feel like he's been initiating a little bit less the last week or so. I feel like it's not been like a straight up regression to last year's style, but like a little bit. And I would like him to get back to like being assertive in transition, attacking in the pick and roll, and not. I feel like he's been shelling up just a little bit. I feel like there's just been a half a step back from what we saw to start the season. Jarrett, he was so good in that last game that it's hard to think about what he can be better at. I think in general it's just not I don't know. I don't have anything for Jarrett. He's been great. He's one of those guys where you just don't really need him to stretch his game, and he's been really, really good.
Yeah, you didn't make a point that I disagreed with, so I'm going to yes and. I think what I'd like to see from the starters overall is just continuing to match or proof their style of play. Don't get away from it. And I think what that really comes down to is continuing to involve Evan Mobley. Like, I do agree with your assessment that there's been times where he hasn't been as involved. I think the good that we've seen out of Darius, Donovan, Mobley, and Allen, like, I don't need them to add to it this season. Like, I'm very, very comfortable with what they're bringing to the table. But it's just making sure that there is the right shot diet, that Mobley is staying involved, because I still feel like that is the most important thing to solving playoff defenses and keeping this team at a championship caliber. We can't have, I don't want to pick on him because he had a bad shooting game and he's always upfront about it. But like, you can't have George take more shots than Mobley in a game. Like, I'm sorry, it just can't happen. Like, you can have the stretches against Boston where it just didn't feel like he was getting touches, and maybe those touches materialize in different ways. Maybe sometimes it's as a ball handler, sometimes it's dribble handoffs. But I want those touches to remain consistent when it comes to Mobley.
Yeah. That's fair.
Yeah. More Evan Mobley is always a good thing. Another question from our Discord from Reese. What are some spots you've seen about the Celtics? I assume he means that the Cavs can kind of pick on. There's obvious room for growth on our end for our performances to be better. But how do we move forward and identify pressure points on the Celtics for us to take advantage of?
Well, I think they already did. That's the nice thing. I think they figure it out. At least I hope they figured it out. I guess we'll see on Sunday. It's Sunday, right? Now Monday?
It is. It's unbelievable that it's here already.
And I think that we'll see if they agree with us that their strategy of switching and letting Darius guard at the front at the point of attack and kind of baiting Boston into mismatch ball is something that they want to keep doing. And I thought they really did a nice job of gumming up the Boston engine. And then, I do think I am interested to see, because a big part of their comeback was attacking Keita. And now with Porzingis back, he's out of the rotation, or mostly going to be out of the rotation. It certainly will be when games matter if everyone's healthy. And I'm interested to see how they can kind of slip into the open space. But I think the biggest challenge for them is Boston does such a nice job of switching, of staying home at the point of attack, and gunking up off ball stuff that they weren't able to get threes up. I think the Cavs have to figure out what their road to getting at least 35 3-point attempts is, because it's just going to be hard to beat Boston if they're out attempting you by like 15 in a game from three. And as much credit as they get for how they generate 3-point attempts, they probably don't get enough for how well they dissuade them. Part of that is in the form of letting people walk to the rim so far this season, but they just added their rim deterrent in Kristaps Porzingis, who is the best rim protector on the team by a country mile. So I think those are the things that I really want to see, is figuring out ways, whether it's just more slips, guard screens, just to try to trick Derek White or Drew Holiday into making a mistake, or even just getting pulling guys like Porzingis out of the paint by forcing him to switch up, and just getting him out and then reversing the ball and then attacking. I think those are the things I'm excited to see. But I mean, they're a great team. There's no scab to really pick at here. That's part of what makes them so brutal, is you just have to execute every play over and over and over again.
Yeah, and obviously it's disappointing that we're not going to have Max for that game. We'll see.
Really hope we have Dean.
Yeah, Chris Fedor did mention today that it's possible that we see Dean and Karras back. At least Isaac's going to be back for that one. But I'm going to be really interested to see what Porzingis does to both their offense and the defense. I think he obviously makes them a better team. And like you said, he's going to dissuade a lot of those rim attempts. But last year, Boston gave up more wide open threes than any other team. And I wonder if playing more small ball with Kristaps out kind of changed how they defend. And maybe the 3-point arc is going to open up a little bit more now that he's back. Or is he going to be playing more drop rather than coming up to the level like an Al Horford or some of the other guys they played there? That's going to be really interesting for me to kind of identify. But when it comes to the Cavs defensively, like I really, really feel like just play your base defense for the most part. Like, don't overcompensate. If someone lights you up in isolation, live with it, man. Like, Kawhi Leonard won Finals MVP with LeBron scoring 30 points per game on 50% shooting and like 55% from three, right? Like, he made him work for all of those possessions, and it got Miami out of their offensive rhythm. If they are hunting DG, if they are hunting Donovan, like, that's going to happen. They're smaller guards, and typically when you are at the point of attack, when you are a guard, you're getting involved in a lot of defensive actions because guards are the ones that are initiating that. And I just kind of trust those guys to hold up in those situations. You look at DG as an isolation defender the last few years. He's 55th percentile this year. Last year, with everything going to hell, he was still 63rd percentile. Was 44th the year before that. Like, he holds up in those situations. If you look at pick and roll ball handler defense in the playoffs, which I think is indicative of teams trying to force those switches, it was one of the few things that went well against the Knicks. He was in the 91st percentile in terms of how he defended those possessions. And like the points per possession are at a stage that you can live with. I'm going to live with that. I trust the help defense that the Cavs have. And if we're talking about the fully healthy rotation, outside of Darius and Donovan, if the next 4 in a 9-man rotation are Ty Jerome, Max Strus, Isaac Okoro, and Dean Wade, the only players under 6'5" are Darius and Donovan. And we already know that they've held up well in a playoff series. So I think you're going to have length. Tough shot makers are going to make tough shots. It doesn't matter if you are 5 inches shorter or 5 inches taller. Like, Kyrie was shooting over Clay, and Clay had a lot of length on him. Like, that's what pure scorers do. But if you're getting them out of their offensive rhythm and they are creating it, hunting switches, attacking in isolation rather than, generating easy catch and shoot looks, there's a cumulative effect. There's a cumulative fatigue that's going to, occur in those situations. So, I don't think there's any, weakness really to expose with the Boston Celtics. It's just about baiting them into their worst habits and executing, as you said, over 48 minutes and hoping that, you just played better on any given night.
Yeah, and by the way, like to your point about staying in the base, and I'm not saying you're saying this at all, but like it doesn't just mean stay home at all costs. It doesn't mean don't help. The only way to beat a team this good is to help and recover and do it right every time. Like you have to still be able to take a step in and dissuade a Jason Tatum drive because he's too good as a driver. He will, if you play one-on-one against Boston all day, you will eventually lose that way too. It is the finest of lines that you have to try to walk where you are helping, you are recovering, and you're also just holding up as best you can at the point of attack as well. One thing I will say before we move on, I really do think to me, the road to beating Boston for Cleveland is with both bigs on the floor. And I thought that was actually one of the only good things about their offense in the first quarter of that 20-point first quarter was some of the big-to-big stuff. I thought Evan was great in the third as a lone big, but like I think the way you can short circuit the Boston system is you switch at the point of attack, so you guard like hell and try to stay in front of guys, funnel them to your help defender, and ideally you've got two elite rim protectors that one of them can protect the rim, the other one can help rotate, and you don't just get into mismatch hell or get on a string getting whipped around the perimeter. Like I just think they matter. That duo matters. And I just feel like if it's just a bunch of interchangeable wings instead, and Dean Wade, as good as he's been against the Celtics, I just don't think that's the road, because I think eventually you're just going to lose to Celtic ball if you try to play Celtic ball.
Yeah, I think drawing on the lessons of the past is important. And, thinking back to 2016, like you kind of have to play your style. Play what makes you special as a team. And when you're playing another great team, which the Boston Celtics absolutely are, some nights it's not going to go your way. Thinking back to that finals, there was a lot of 20-point blowouts both directions. Like that is the nature of the league. That's the nature of this sport. It's become even more so with the increase of 3-point volume. Like you kind of have to have faith in what you're doing and just kind of trust that, they're going to throw their punches. You're going to throw yours. They're going to have their blowouts. You might have your blowouts as well. Just got to do it 4 out of 7 times. And I think that's why things like home court matter so much in those situations. Next question comes from our buddy and occasional co-host of the podcast, Jeff Nomina. Why do we think the core four has fairly mediocre net ratings, especially on offense? The two bigs have a 122 offensive rating and a plus 12 net rating in 259 minutes. But the core four as a total has a 116 offensive rating and a plus 5 net rating in 205 minutes. Carter, I'm going to take this answer here.
I'm just gonna go ahead and walk away.
Lineup data, baby. So looking at cleaning the glass that filters out garbage time and whatnot, it actually is less favorable to the core four altogether. It's a 4.9 net rating in 426 possessions. Out of that 426 possessions, 373 of those possessions have come without Sam Merrill, Ty Jerome, and Craig Porter Jr. at small forward. So the majority of those minutes without those three, if you look at just that sample of Okoro, Wade, and Karras, they have a 121 offensive rating, a 109.8 defensive rating, and a plus 11 net. When they play with a small forward, it's a very, very damn good lineup on both ends of the court.
That's a great pull, brother.
It goes to show you that even in a sample size of 426 possessions, 50 possessions that went incredibly poorly is enough to swing those numbers in a dramatic way. That's why, we wait for a lot of the lineup data to get enough possessions to really kind of read into. But, in particular, if you look at the Okoro lineup, 122 offensive rating, plus 12 net, the Karras one has been amazing. Only 42 possessions, but 160 offensive rating and a plus 46 net. The Dean lineup hasn't been good this year, which has primarily been on the offensive end. But, I included Wade's numbers in there, even though it's a net negative lineup, just because, all right, let's illustrate what it looks like when, someone that's actually going to play small forward for this team is playing. The one thing I'll mention, just in the, to be fair here, none of those guys played against Boston. In all likelihood, the defensive rating was going to suffer by those guys playing against Boston no matter what. Like, it probably wouldn't have been as bad as Sam Merrill playing small forward or Craig Porter Jr. or Ty Jerome playing small forward against Boston. But that team is going to shell just about anybody, and that would hurt the numbers. So I just wanted to say that, in the interest of being fair there. But I do think it's noteworthy that whenever the Cavs have played with the small forward, they've been great on both ends of the court.
Yeah, I just think ultimately, first off, you nailed it. I don't really have to say anything else. But I think this is a thing where the sample just is going to be moved by very, very small, finite things. It's like I mentioned, like against the Raptors, they missed like 13 free throws or whatever it was. And if they made 13 free throws, their offensive rating would have been about 13 points better. Like, that's like the difference between a bad one and a really good one. And so these things are really volatile. But ultimately, I think proof's in the pudding with those numbers. I think when they actually play with a small forward, it's quite good. Dean is the one exception, because the on-ball juice maybe isn't there as much, and they
also just didn't shoot well in those minutes, and it's the joys of relatively small samples.
So I don't know, man. I still really like that, and I think if nothing else, the fact that the too big offensive rating with one guard is in the 120s shows you it's not like adding either Darius or Donovan to the alchemy is like, tanking it. So I'm just not worried about it.
Do you want to hear the splits, the big man splits? Because they're all hilarious.
Absolutely, buddy.
And it goes to show, I think the percentage of possessions that they're playing with each other and on their own is about the same, but the minutes per game is down. But I think this really goes to show you just how much garbage time the Cavs have had where none of the core guys are on the court, because the offensive rating with just Mobley on the court, 125, just Allen, 123, the two of them together, 123. Like, each one of those would be the best offense in the NBA. Like, they are just killing it with those bigs on the court.
Yeah. And unless you think that Darius or Donovan is the problem and what makes the two big lineups not work, which I think would be foolhardy, I feel pretty darn good about it, man. So, ultimately, it is what it is. And I think a lot of that stuff is going to normalize. Kyle asks, has Mobley improved as a screener? To my untrained eye, it seems like he has, but I'm curious what you both have noticed.
I'd say yeah. I don't think he's a good screener, but I think he's an adequate one, and that's kind of a big step. I looked at kind of the roll man numbers, points per possession. It's 1.03 versus 1.01. So, finishing out of those situations isn't dramatically different. But I feel like he's making contact a little more. Like, I think you feel his strength as a screener and on finishes more than you have in the past. But I still don't think he's like at Jarrett's level.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, even the frequency kind of goes to show. Jarrett is the roll man and pick and roll about 4 times a game. Evan is that about 2 times a game. They literally use Jarrett as a screener much more often in those actions. Obviously, we don't have the synergy stats because we're not special. But with that said, like, I just think the proof is in the pudding in the usage. I think when they really need to spring someone, it's going to be Jarrett. Do I think Evan is an objectively bad screener like he was the first year and a half or 2 years of his career? No, I don't.
No. It actually kind of ties into the question that David asked, because he said last year Garland was paired with Mobley and Mitchell with Allen. This year it's the other way around. What is the theory behind that change? Does the data support it? We've talked about this in the past, but prior to this year, the lineup data strongly was against that. It was a pretty dramatic difference. It is funny. This year's data is enough to kind of flip them all to positives. Even if you look at like the 2022 through 2025 data, they are all net positives, and that wasn't the case before. But I do think the screening is actually part of my answer, because I think in the past, when Mobley was paired with DG, Darius is the best playmaker on this team by a wide margin. And I think by putting him with Donovan, it's a way to empower him to initiate offense, to continue to get Donnie those off-ball, touches and possessions. Whereas Darius is just such a good pick and roll ball handler. Like, there was no reason for it to not work with Allen. It worked incredibly well in the year that they were both all-stars. So I almost feel like the switch was to force Mobley's hand to be more active as an initiator and as a participant in the offense in those minutes. But that's one of those questions that I'd love to ask Kenny about the reasoning. Because as a lineup data guy, it was just very, very interesting to me that coming into this year, it didn't support it at all.
Yeah, it's one of the things that is kind of stuck in my craw all season, because I don't really know why it's working. Because I felt like it was the inverse was very easy to explain in years past, which is that Donovan is a much more straightforward downhill pick and roll player. So you put him with the best straightforward downhill pick and roll big, and you profit. And Darius and Evan are the more like, cerebral kind of, just more like, I don't know, left to right kind of players, if nothing else. And they vibe, so they play together. I don't know why it's working so well on the other end. The
weirdest thing is it's flipped too, like in a lot of ways. Like these numbers are via cleaning the glass, but the fascinating thing is Mitchell and Allen, they had 120 possessions together. They have a 98 offensive rating and a -8 net rating in those minutes. Like it doesn't make a ton of sense to me. When you look at the Mitchell and Mobley pairing, because part of the question was, has it been working? It does have a +19 net rating. That has come primarily off the strength of the defense. It's only just under 120 in terms of an offensive rating, whereas Darius and Allen, 131 offensive rating. That's only a +9 net, because that lineup is getting shelled from three with a 123 defensive rating. And then Garland and Mobley, they haven't played a lot together, only 71 possessions, but they do have a 144 offensive rating and a +14 net.
Yeah, I think ultimately maybe there's just a degree of like Darius gets freed up by the better screen setter, and Darius in space really, really benefits from that, because when Darius has an advantage, it's just kind of game blouses for the other team. And maybe Donovan is able to exist in that space. Evan can attack a little more. But I don't all the way know. And I think you're right. This is one I'd love to ask Kenny. And if we were real journalists, we would have found a way into a press room and ask, but we're not.
We're just not ambitious enough. And yeah, it's fascinating to me, because the Donnie only lineups have been winning on defense. The Darius only lineups have been winning on offense.
That does track with my eye test, by the way.
Yeah, it's 500 possessions now for each of them. The just Garland minutes have a 134 offensive rating and a +12 net. The Donnie only lineups have been kind of struggling on offense, relatively speaking, with 117 and +15 net. But all of those net ratings are fantastic. I expect it to normalize. Like, I expect the Mitchell lineups to get better offensively and worse defensively. I expect the Darius lineups to come down to earth offensively, because 134 is impossible. I can't believe it's that high through 500 possessions. But I expect the defense to improve there as well. But, when you're winning, you're winning. When these lineups are working, they're working. But I thought the screening actually really did tie in well to David's question.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's been, that's the nice thing, is there's just not that much stuff that isn't working. So you just don't need to really worry about it in the end. I thought that was an interesting question. Dave emailed us and asked, wondering what we think the maximum minutes Ty Jerome should play is. If he keeps being a light out player, would you test his minutes or test his limit? And I think my answer to this question is, I think the only germane answer to that question is, what's the most you would play him in a game? and in an individual game, because I think the rotation is just going to bear itself out most nights, and he's going to be between 20 to 30 minutes most nights. And I think my max is whatever the team needs. Like, I could see a playoff game where he plays 32, 33 minutes, maybe even more. What do you think?
I could see that. I was actually fascinated to kind of look at the numbers. Darius and Donnie are only playing 17 minutes together this year, and Mobley and Allen are only playing 15 minutes together, because I wanted to look at that first, because I'm like, if Darius and Donnie, going into the playoffs, I expect that to be around 20 to 22 minutes per game. If they're playing that many together, how many does that realistically open up for Ty Jerome? You know, he could be playing some small forward, but I think if this team is fully healthy, I don't expect to see a lot of that, maybe at most kind of a 5-minute punch. So that kind of puts a cap at maybe, you know, the high 20s to the low 30s. I'd also, like, I think one of the benefits to this current role is it helps keep him healthy. This is a guy that has missed a lot of time over his NBA career, and you know, whether it's keeping his minutes down, whether it's keeping Karas's down, whether it's Max's once he comes back, like, I think keeping these guys healthy and sharp, it helps enable how effective they've been. And I'm 99% sure that Kenny, when he was doing kind of his start of the year press conferences, talked about, you know, the Olympic experience and how guys, you know, they'd come in for 6 minutes, they'd play incredibly hard, then they'd come out, and then the next guys would come and play full speed. It feels like the Cavs have adopted that mentality of, hey, we're going to play fast, we're going to play really hard for the minutes that we're out there, and we're going to be getting breaks. And I think keeping them in that space means that there's going to be diminishing returns if you start dragging these guys, especially, you know, reserve players, giving them a ton of minutes, because they're not going to be able to play as hard, and they're probably not going to be as effective. But I agree with you. I can see getting to like the mid 20s and maybe even low 30s, depending on the matchup and what the game's calling for.
The other thing that I'll say is the fact that he can play at an elite level next to Darius or Donovan and can kind of chameleon his way into whatever he needs to be for that duo bodes really well on if you're having a playoff game where one of the two just doesn't have it. You know, neither are going to get benched in a playoff game, I would suspect, at least, like, you know, to the tune of like 15 minutes. But you could see a game where Darius or Donovan are just having a really rough game, you know, and Ty just ends up closing over one of them if things are really, really just not, you know. Like, I actually do think, Justin, and I wonder what you think about this, I think if the team had their wings, Ty would have closed against Boston.
I think so.
I think Darius probably would have sat, because it just was so not his game. And I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think Kenny has that kind of equity with his players, where if he really knows that a guy just doesn't have it and he doesn't have his legs, that he can get away with doing stuff like that. So I think the number could get real high on a night-to-night basis, but the reality is no one's numbers are that high on a night-to-night basis. And I'm starting to think even more that if people are expecting Kenny just to go from 10 or 11 down to 8 in the postseason, I don't know if he will. I think it'll be like maybe down to 9. I just get the impression this is just how he believes. This isn't like, I don't hear him saying that I play 10 or 11 guys so I can give everyone rest. It seems to be, I play 10 guys because that's how I think basketball is best played.
Yeah. And you know, Matt asked this as well. If the Cavs get fully healthy, do you bump someone from the rotation for Strus to squeeze them in, or rotate rest days? Will Jerome get the 20 minutes a night? And like, that ties right into what we've been talking about and what we touched on before. But like, I agree with you. I think it's going to go down to 9. And if I had to guess, you know, it's the starters with Max. It's Ty Jerome, Isaac Okoro, Karis LeVert, and Dean Wade. Yeah. And, you know, from there, you can mix in a Sam Merrill, you can mix in a George Niang, but I feel like that's going to be your first 9. I just like what that 9 kind of brings to the table. And, you know, I think a lot of nights you are going to go to 10, 11. And I think this team is good enough that if you have all those guys and you're playing like that, there's going to be garbage time. But yeah, that's kind of how I expect it to shake out.
Yeah, those are the clear 9 to me.
Yeah, totally agree. We'll going to try to speed through these questions because I hate any time that we leave any on, you know, the cutting room floor. Steph asks, who's the next 3-4 or 4-5 big man that the Cavs are developing with the charge that you think has a chance to make to the Cavs roster? Do you think he will see playing time this year with the Cavs? Which kind of ties into the question that Jay Quest asked in our YouTube chat. Do you think Thor is ready to start taking some of the would-be Dean Wade minutes? I assume he means kind of in this stretch. I will say I think the most ready out of the two-way guys is JT Thor. He is someone that's played a lot of NBA minutes right now. I don't expect him to be getting kind of those Dean minutes. It sounds like Dean's going to be, coming back in the near future, but the short and very boring answer is no. I don't think that any of the two-way guys are ready for minutes this season. I think this is, we've been talking about the rotation a fair bit tonight, and it's deep. There's a lot of good NBA players in it, and I think those guys getting the developmental minutes and getting to work with the Cavs shooting coaches that have, countless success stories over the recent years, I think that that's really beneficial to them. But, moving forward, I can see JT Thor, Luke Travers, and, even Amani Bates potentially competing for roles in the future.
I will slightly zag and say that JT Thor is ready for NBA minutes, but not on this team. He ain't. The team's just too good, too deep, and I watched him be a relatively helpful NBA player last season. But on this team, the bar is much higher for that, and they just simply do not have room to accommodate. Bald Man Gets Paid asks, given that you said playmaking was this team's biggest need entering the season, and that question has been answered by Ty Jerome and Karras, of course, what is this team's current positional need, and why is it a 4-5?
You know what? I'll say this. It warms my heart anytime I hear a listener, really kind of internalize the gospels that I've been preaching, and I feel like playmaking has been such a major theme and something that we really wanted to see. I've loved the playmaking that this team has had. I feel like a 4-3 is kind of the most necessary thing. Like if I'm looking at this team's biggest need, someone that can play either at the power forward position or slide over to the 3, if I'm looking for an archetype to bring in, would be ideal. You can find a 4-5. Like I think, the theme there is positional versatility. I kind of feel like as much as I want to add a center, and maybe there's an opportunity to do so in the buyout market, if the standard we're holding ourselves to is can we beat the Boston Celtics, there's no backup center you can bring in that's going to insulate you against an Evan Mobley or Jared Allen injury. Like it's kind of like if you lose your starting quarterback in the NFL, like you might still win games, but you're not going to win a Super Bowl with your backup. Like it just kind of is what it is. So I think my future planning goes more to best case scenario. And to me, that means, if I'm looking at an archetype, it's a 4-3 that can protect the rim, that can space the floor and give you some defense.
I still like a 4-5, especially if the roster is mostly going to stay as it is, if you're just looking to purely add to the roster on the buyout market, etc. Because I don't foresee a buyout that can crack the rotation, even if things go awry when the team is fully healthy. If the team's fully healthy, I don't see a Marcus Morris getting in. By the way, they weren't fully healthy last year, obviously. But so on that end, I go 4-5. But for the reasons you kind of mentioned, I totally understand. But the only caveat I'll make is it's not just injury. It's what if Evan gets 2 BS fouls in the first quarter, and then picks up a third, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, it's Dean at center for the next 6 minutes. And like that's just I just find that to be a dangerous game, so I would like just a little more insulation than Tristan at that position, and just
that's fair.
And more than anything, I just would like a different archetype. Obviously this guy is not who I would want because he's not in the league anymore. But like you look at a guy like Montrezl Harrell that was like just a different archetype. Like I would like someone who is like does stuff that's different from everyone else on the team. I think that could be an interesting thing to maybe chase as you round out your roster going into the end of the year. Sam asks, does Jerome's emergence lessen the need for Sam and or Karras looking ahead of the trade deadline?
See, this is why I'm very happy. One of many reasons that I'm happy I'm not a general manager or team president, because I do think you have to evaluate every option. Like I think you have to look at what's available anytime you have expiring contracts like Karras or Sam Merrill. You have to see, what the market's going to dictate. I think the Cavs are in a good position where if options to get better aren't available at the trade deadline, you can stand pat and you can feel pretty good about this roster. I think it's a contender as currently constructed. But you need to evaluate, is there an opportunity to make a lateral move and get, that 4-3 archetype? Is there an opportunity to, maybe take a small step back, fulfill that team need, but you get a player with terms? So you're thinking about future team building. I do think the luxury of having someone like Ty Jerome, step up in the way that he has is you can maybe justify and think to yourself, okay, maybe I am taking a little step back, but I'm taking a step back to like a Ty Jerome. Like we can replace one of these players in the aggregate because we have enough guys that we feel confident can step up. And, maybe the player that we're getting in return in a vacuum isn't as good as whoever we're sending out, but might make us better in terms of a complete rotation. So I don't think I'm not saying, oh, you got to go out and trade these guys or anything like that. But I do think that the Cavs have to thoroughly explore what options are available to them. And I would expect them to do this. So that, like, everything that we've heard, they did that even this past offseason. They've done it, every trade deadline. But I think the one thing that I appreciate with Kobe Altman is he has taken a very patient approach and hasn't made a move to make a move. And, when things are clicking as well as they have been, and these guys have been valuable contributors, it is hard to find something realistic. It's easy to think of an archetype, but putting a name to that and putting an availability to that player is very tricky.
Yeah, I mean, well said, so I won't belabor the point. I'll just say, anytime you have players who play above their head, or not above their head, because that's not, I don't think, even accurate at this point, but anytime you have players that play above your expectation, it unlocks optionality and it also insulates you. Maybe you don't need to play Karras when he's having a bad game, knowing that you have Ty. The Cavs had to play all their players. When they had less depth, they had to play everyone even through and give them heavy minutes through their bad games, because it's like, well, we don't really trust the next person to be able to, do better. And the Cavs have that optionality, so that reflects both in what Kenny can do with the team in his rotation, and it reflects with what Kobe can do with his team building.
Totally agree. All right, last question here. Apologies to our guy Adam Eden. We love you. I'll reply to you on Twitter with my answer. He wanted us to rank the Price Doherty, LeBron 1.0, and Core 4 eras. I'm going to give kind of the older ones more of a benefit of the doubt. So maybe I am answering it right now. So I'll give you the answer on Twitter. But right now, Core 4 sits behind those guys, but with the chance to elevate all the way to the top of that ranking. But the final question from Mark's Price, not that one. For long-term sustainability, what weaknesses do you think the Cavs should prioritize improving? Offensive rebounding or getting to the free throw line with more frequency? Do you think these are just features of their offense now? As an example, their offensive rebounding numbers will be low because they're maintaining good defensive positioning post-shot and trusting their shot-making ability rather than looking for second chance points. And their free throw attempts will be low because they get so many clean looks. Data to back up his points, they are 25th in offensive rebound percentage and 30th in terms of percentage of points coming from the free throw line. Carter, your thoughts?
Unhappy answer. I just don't think they're that good at either of them. I don't think the Cavs are good at drawing fouls. And some of that is some small market reputation. I don't know. Some of it is just the play style. Whatever it might be. I just don't think the Cavs are consistently good at getting the referees to blow their whistle. It haven't been for years. So I just don't know if that's coming. And I also don't think this team is a great offensive rebounding team. I think, Evan.
What should they prioritize improving? What do you think either is possible to improve? Through increased focus or effort, kind of going into either category.
I guess the free throw thing, just because you don't take anything off the table. I think that this team, when it gets into its shell defensively, is pretty impossible to score on over the course of a season. And because I don't think they are elite offensive rebounders anywhere on the roster except Tristan, you are going to have to go out of your way to improve that one. So I guess I would pick the free throw rate, but if either of these are above league average by the end of the year, I'll be surprised.
I agree with that portion of it. I will say offensive rebounding percentage for me. I think the free throw thing has a little bit to do with the makeup with this team. They are very high in drives. But when you look at like the possessions Mobley and Allen get at the rim, a lot of time it's Darius and Donovan creating like really open dunks, lobs, even the big to big passing has been fantastic. So I think that kind of skews why they don't get free throws on those types of possessions. And when you look at the guards, normally small guards don't get rewarded with going to the free throw line. In order to do so, you have to stop attempting to make the shot. You have to sell your body. You have to, throw yourself to the floor. And I just don't want Darius and Donovan to doing that. I don't want, I don't think it translates to the playoffs. Those whistles dry up. I don't want it from an injury standpoint. I don't want Darius throwing his face into hips, right? Like, let's play honest basketball here. I think the offensive rebounding percentage can improve. And it's actually one of the things that I'm looking to see when Max gets back, because Max did a really good job of creating those, second chance opportunities. And I think that that's somewhere that Isaac can get better. I think Max is going to help in that category. And obviously Dean, when he's playing at that position, can help. Karras has done a good job. So I actually think the guys that aren't playing right now and the small forward position can help with that offensive rebounding, percentage. But I agree with you. I don't think it's ever going to be league average.
I just don't think that's what this team is.
Yeah, it's fair. And what this team already is pretty damn good. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in live on YouTube. And thanks to everyone that submitted the questions. We really, really do appreciate you guys. If you want to support us and you're watching live on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe. Click that notification bell so you know when we're going live. If you're listening via podcast and you want to support us, leave us a rating, leave a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of Chasedown's exclusive Discord chat, send a screenshot of the review to chasedownpod@gmail.com. However you choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there. Until next time, go Cavs.